Nations Trust Bank Private Banking is the epitome of elite banking. With its exclusive privileges devoted to providing just the right balance between financial success and lifestyle, our private banking members richly deserve. A financial solution dedicated to excellence, with an unparalleled array of products and services that enrich, enhance, and empower success. A financial solution focused on wealth creation, lifestyle, and the establishment of legacy. A legacy of priority, a legacy of abundance, a legacy much desired. Creating a legacy that's timeless.
All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another session with the WNPS. Nice to see everyone. I see a number of royalists and Thomians as well. Thank you very much for coming. Our president is here after the match, and the national president is also coming, so something is happening at the BMIC this evening. That's great. And so thanks to our principal sponsors of this lecture series, Nations Trust Bank. They've been supporting us, as you know, quite regularly and for a long time. They support us with the Varnam, the Jungle Telegraph, Loris, and the series. So that's been a great partnership. Thank you very much to them. And, you know, we appreciate their support. A quick plug or two. One is, of course, to, you know, please keep paying your subs. We've started the new year. We need that money. So grab your purses if you haven't done that. And just as a, you know, side anecdote, we had an interesting encounter. Our rapid response team yesterday alerted us to a New Year celebration, big party going to happen in Desaru Park. And I'm really proud to say that, you know, the WNPS team today with Professor Sampath Siniviratna, they were able to actually go across and talk to the ITN team and convince them to change the location and not have a big tamasha at the Desaru Park. So thanks to their chairman, Sudarshan Gunawardana, and the team for that decision taken. So, you know, little steps, but very important steps as we keep fighting day by day. The WNPS lecture series as well as the trip calendar is up for all of you. And of course, we always welcome new members to come, as well as please, you know, spend some time coming to our bungalows in Yala and Vilpattu. Right, with that, we're going to change the format a little bit today. And you know, all of you come here regularly to talk to us, but many people ask, you know, what does WNPS do? Very often we speak of WNPS. I'm not sure whether, I think I need the presentation screen on, guys. All right, so quite often the question is, you know, what does WNPS do and how do we speak about WNPS? So this is something I promise you we haven't shared before to tell you this story, and let me take a few minutes to do that. So we often talk about the history of WNPS, how it's a 125 plus year organization and our origins and the creation of the parks and the Singharaja battles and things like that. But what's more important is what do we do? And things have evolved a lot in the recent past, and so I'm going to take a stab at telling you this story. So today when we talk of what does WNPS do, we actually talk about it in 4 pillars, right? And I'll talk to you around these in a little bit of detail, but the first is ecosystems. WNPS does a lot of work on ecosystems. Secondly, on species, our work around species. The third area is in all the communities and citizens that we engage in. And our fourth pillar is what we call platform initiatives, things that cut across all of these. So broadly, these are the 4 pillars that WNPS works in today. So we've done some work to actually get this onto one slide. And if you were to look at it, which I know you can't see, it's going to end up being something like that. And I'm going to talk to you through that very quickly. But this is the one picture of everything WNPS does. So 4 quadrants, let's talk. Right, what do we do in the ecosystem space? Our DNA, our history of WNPS is as an ecosystem player. We created the parks, we worked with DWC, we fought for Singaraja. These are all ecosystem plays. And I'm really proud today that WNPS is back and playing very aggressively in the ecosystem space. So if you look at the 4 main areas that we work on in the ecosystems, the first is on plant. Last month we launched the plant website, all of you know. This is our big private conservation initiative where WNPS has said we want to own and protect land as a private player. And our footprint today, after 2 years of work, has reached 2,500 acres. So we are very proud with that conservation work we are doing there. And in that, we have 3 pillars. You have partners who come to us and work with us on land. There are plantation companies, individuals, and people who bring land to the table and say, let's jointly work to protect the land. Then there are partners who come and work with us on the services. They bring us plants, they bring us advice, they bring us technical know-how, they fund us for camera traps and things like that, and they support us on services. And finally, there are partners who fund us for land purchase, land acquisition. And we've successfully bought, in the name of WNPS, a number of very sensitive lands today. And we also have 1 or 2 very generous donors who have actually given us land. So these are the 3 pillars we play on plant. Then you have the marine subcommittees doing a big play in Anivilundava and restoring an entire ecosystem there of a huge amount of hectares with a number of partners. So that's one of their biggest plays. Then you have a series of talks, Chat by the Seas, and a couple of other areas of work that the marine subcommittee does. Then you have Green Isle, our project in Athidia, restoring that, and we do 2 pillars there, the engagement work and the community work. And finally, ROW, reforestation. That's one of our oldest projects of reforesting, recreating an ecosystem, and that we do a lot of work on the reforestation and the community engagement. So these are the pillars of community engagement on ecosystems that we play. Let's talk species. What do we do in species? So we have 3 big plays in species. As many of you know, we play with the Wildcat subcommittee, and under that, LOLC has funded us and supported us a lot in setting up a number of regional centers to study leopard behavior outside of the parks. Very big project, millions of rupees each year, and we are doing some phenomenal work there. Then you have the Catchats, which they work with, and a number of other initiatives in the hill country with the Rainforest Alliance and other partners and things like that, fighting to help that leopard habitat and other small cat work. So that's on the wildcats. We have lots of battles on the human-elephant conflict. And those, again, 3 big pillars. We have the Alipancha project, which is, again, double-digit millions a year, collaring and releasing elephants and studying their behavior, studying their impacts through antibiotic studies and a number of other things. The LRS, 20-odd locations live at the moment all over the country, studying the impacts of trying to protect small areas from elephants in the night and things like that. Some very interesting work, and a couple of other areas. And finally, big play on endemics, protecting the species that are very special to Sri Lanka. Again, 20+ million rupees a year being spent on that initiative. So those are the plays in the species side. Thirdly, citizens and communities. With all due respect, a few years ago, we realized that this society is looking a little bit old, and we are too old for this. And we knew we had to change the profile of this society, and we accelerated the work we did and started with the youth wing, and that's going great guns. We have a very vibrant youth wing, and they work in 100-odd schools in the country today, and they are doing a lot of capacity development, the most recent one being with the British Council, and a lot of other initiatives. So we are very proud of about 30-40 young leaders leading the charge there. And member initiatives, which most of you are familiar with, I won't talk too much, the trips and all the excursions and all kinds of things that we do with the bungalows. We didn't stop with the youth wing. We started up the Wild Kids, 8 to 12 years old, and we are having 100+ kids meeting regularly every month, doing excursions. We are giving them experiences. We are starting young. And the 4th area is we have the different partnerships. DWC and so many other international partners that we work with. We have the ambassadors, people like Mahela Javardhana and Jayanti, who work as conservation ambassadors for us. And finally, we work with 25 district reps all over the country. So that's our work on communities. And finally, what are the platform initiatives, things which cut across the entire ecosystem? So for example, our legal work. If we start a case, that's ecosystem, species, community, everything gets touched. When we fight our legal battles, we try to influence legal policy, and we touch on, increasing awareness with lawyers and things like that. There's a whole ton of work going there. You're familiar with all our publications. We do a lot of work on the publicity side. Of course, a lot of our work needs money, and we are actively raising funds every day, and we need all of you. Finally, we have two interesting committees, Science for Conservation and Climate Change. And we have the lectures, and like I mentioned earlier, we have the rapid response. So in a big nutshell, that was all the work that WNPS is doing today. So a lot of people don't realize the magnitude of the work we do. And if you're wondering where this energy and money comes from, in addition to a whole bunch of people who are doing this for nothing, here's the other part of it. Our sponsors. So if you look, we've structured all those sponsor logos against each of the support areas that I described earlier. So I'll just give one or two examples. If I start in the left corner, LOLC is against the Wildcat initiatives. They are the big sponsor. Or if I look at, the marine project, it's HEMAS and Star Garments and things like that. You'll find their logo against that. So you have all these different sponsors supporting each of those different initiatives that I mentioned. And there's a whole set right at the bottom as well. Banks, when it comes to our lecture series, and JKOA and some of the other things, British Council, the US Forest funding us, and things like that. So this is where all the money and partnerships come from. And if you're wondering what the magnitude of that is, a few years ago, we used to be raising, if you look at all the money which went through WNPS, it was in the single-digit millions, probably in the lower parts of millions, not too long ago, 5-6 years ago. And today, if I were to answer that question, it's something like this. Today, we are channeling about 150 million through the society, plus a further 60 million which gets spent directly. So for example, if we say we need some furniture and somebody gives us the furniture, it doesn't hit our accounts. If you want to buy a land for conservation and somebody says, I'll buy that and keep it, but you conserve it, it doesn't hit our accounts. There's another 60 million there. 210 million. So when you scale an organization from what it was within this short period by anything from 20 to 30 times, not percent, times, you're bound to have some problems. And we do have problems. We need help because obviously we are going to have capacity challenges, and that's where you can help. We need more people. So we'd like you to firstly more people to become members of WNPS. We'd like people to contribute your talents, your abilities. That's number 2. The third area is join some subcommittees. Give us your help. A lot of you have great talents, skills that we need in many ways. Help us. The fourth area is that you can introduce us to people who can partner us, support us. Finally, fund us, right? It's amazing how many people spend tons of money going on trips, photography, all of that. Fund some of the conservation work. And finally, if you can help us find partners who can donate land or raise money internationally for land, we can sustain what we are experiencing for the lifetimes to come. So if any of you think that we are slowing down, we are not. We're going to keep accelerating. And the journey we are on is not about building a bigger committee to do this. This is about building an army. There's a battle, there's a war on the environment, and we are about building an army so that WNPS can take its rightful place as a player in this country. So this is the work that WNPS is doing today. And thank you for all your support and engagement as we go through this journey. So we took 10 minutes to talk to you about what we do, because we rarely tell you this story. Thank you very much. And let's move on to the next segment. I've asked Sumith's permission to do away with the niceties today, because we all know who we are dealing with. And we took some extra time to talk to you today on WNPS. So we'll jump straight in with no introductions and all of that. Sumith, the man himself, we've had him on the podium many times. So Sumith, can you do the honors and tell us whether we'll have a park in a few years' time? A few talks ago, we were raising a flag on Horton Plains. And you can see WNPS has started to create some awareness, because we are very worried that what you're seeing and hearing about Yala today is the future of Horton. So we had better do what it takes to not have Horton ruined and fight hard to win back Yala. So let's see what Sumith has in store for us. Ladies and gentlemen, Sumith Pilapitiya, Dr. Sumith Pilapitiya.
Thank you, Shreyan. Good evening. I would like to thank WNPS for inviting me to speak on this topic, which is very close to my heart. I would also like to say, and I'm sure either everyone who is here or most of you who are here, have at one time or the other been fascinated by Yala. But unfortunately, because of what has been happening in Yala over the last 15 to 18 years, there are some of you who have been turned away from that and don't even want to visit. So before I start my presentation, I would like to appeal to everyone who has some fascination for Yala and who has had any fascination for Yala, even though you may be discouraged now, that if we want to save this natural asset for future generations of our country, it's time for us to combine, band together, and support the Department of Wildlife Conservation in trying to save Yala from total destruction. Having said we should support the department, if the department does not want our support or does not do anything, then I think we should all get together and pressure the department into doing what is right. So with that, I would like to start first by touching a little bit upon the potential for wildlife tourism in Sri Lanka, because most of our politicians and policymakers don't seem to understand the importance and the development potential Sri Lanka has in wildlife tourism. In fact, wildlife tourism could be the biggest driver for growth of tourism in Sri Lanka. If you just take a few countries that are doing it right and that has attracted high-end wildlife tourism, South Africa, the direct impact of tourism is $10 billion a year. Costa Rica, which is a world renowned as a premier ecotourism destination, the direct and indirect impacts of tourism is about 14% of GDP. Rwanda, which was in the same situation we were in with the war, they also had a long civil war, and both of us, I think, finished our wars around the same time. But Rwanda has targeted high-end tourism after the civil war and focused on guerrilla tourism. And today, a 1-hour visit costs around $1,500 per person, and it is usually fully booked. So this is the potential we in Sri Lanka have if we really want to promote wildlife tourism properly. Just wanting to promote it is one thing, but actually being able to do it is another thing. Sri Lanka has tremendous potential in the sense that in a study that was done among the countries that are listed out here, all Asian countries, Sri Lanka comes number 1 in a category called observability, which is how easy it is to actually see wildlife. And all of you who have been to parks in this country know, within a few minutes of entering the park, you begin to see wildlife. We rank number 1 in the world wildlife tourism potential rank as well. So the assets that we need are plentiful. We should take these assets and brand it so that we can market it well. And we have plenty to market. Yala and Vilpattu are the best places in the world to see leopards. Minneria, Kaudulla and Udawalave are the best places to see large herds of Asian elephants. Unfortunately, we humans have to intervene and mess things up when things are going great. So with the advent of Morgahakanda, I'm no longer sure whether the great elephant gathering will continue. But that too is something that we have to address. Mirissa, Kalpitia and Trinco are the best places in the world to see blue whales and sperm whales. And Sri Lanka is the only country in the world where you can see the largest marine mammal, the blue whale, in the morning, and see the largest land mammal, the elephant, within 12 hours. There are many places in the world you can see both, but not within a 12-hour period. And all our natural resources and assets can be experienced in a short time to fit within a tourist schedule. So we are basically the wildlife wonder of Asia. And it's not only that we think we are a wildlife wonder. There have been Lonely Planet identified the great elephant gathering as the world's 6th best wildlife wonder. National Geographic in 2010 identified Sri Lanka as one of the best 25 new places to go on a trip. National Geographic in 2012 identified Sri Lanka as the 6th best destination to go on a trip. And even with the mess that we have in our national parks, including Yala, in February 2023, Forbes magazine identified Sri Lanka as the best safari destination outside Africa for 2023. So the world realizes what we have. We in this room realize what we have. Trying to get the politicians and the policymakers to realize it is our challenge. But I think we should keep trying, because it's money that talks. There's no point talking about conservation to politicians. They don't relate to it. But if we can earn the type of money the countries that I mentioned are earning, then we certainly will get their attention. Let me now focus on Yala National Park. We have over 40 species of mammals, 215 species of birds, including 6 endemic species. Angie Scott, an award-winning photographer for Big Cat Diary, is quoted to have said, "If God created a patch of land for leopards on earth, then it must be Yala." Similarly, Yala National Park is the only national park in the world that has an albino elephant in the wild. So the assets that we have are so unique, and we really can market these assets to earn revenue for this country. But what have we done to that premier national park? This is what has become of Yala National Park today. I doubt whether we can attract big money from tourists who would like to come and sit in traffic jams to see wildlife. You will only attract the cheaper tourists coming to see something like that. But there are some reasons that have led to this situation, which I think all of us should know. Tourist numbers have increased over 1,000%, over 1,000% since 2008 to 2017. From 48,000 tourists in 2008 to 650,000 visitors to Yala by 2017. The Wildlife Conservation Department, or any other agency also, I'm sure, would not be geared to cater to this exponential rise in tourism. That is where the department had no alternative but to allow the safari jeep drivers to take guests into the park without a tracker. Prior to 2008, every single vehicle, if we all remember, had a tracker accompanying vehicles. But with this exponential rise, the department in total has 1,500 staff. Total, from the DG downwards to the laborer. And sometimes in Yala, we have 850 vehicles. So it certainly is not possible for the department to have a tracker in every vehicle. That is where the safari jeep drivers were allowed to go on their own. The mistake we made, we have made mistakes. The mistake we made was we didn't train them before letting them go in. So that has created a problem. But it is not only the safari vehicles that are a problem, the visitors are a problem as well. All of us who go into the parks. And one of the biggest concerns I have is some data that I saw in a World Bank Colombo University study that was done on wildlife tourism in Sri Lanka, which showed, I'll just talk about one point, when they spoke to repeat visitors to Sri Lanka, less than 2% go to a wildlife park on their repeat visit. If less than 2% are going to a wildlife park on a repeat visit, whereas they go repeatedly to Polonnaruwa, Sigiriya and places like that, what does that tell us about the experience they had in the national parks? If it was good, they would have gone again. And some of the things that lead to this experience, bad experience of tourists, as well as bad experience of Sri Lankans, is something like this. Just look at this. I'll talk about it after we finish. This Tusker Sando in Yala is trying to cross the road. You see the jeep driver moving the vehicle away, allowing Sando to cross. That's why the jeep moved forward. These people with cameras claim to be wildlife photographers. They don't know the first thing about wildlife photography. A good wildlife photographer takes his photographs in a way that the animal doesn't even know the photographer was there. So just because you have a camera, now if you notice that the jeep driver moved away, it is the guests who told the jeep driver to reverse, right? So as long as we who are going to the parks behave like this, we will never ever be able to reverse the trend of degradation of our national parks. So all of us also have to be a little more responsible. I know all of us like to take good photographs, but you never take a photograph at the expense of an animal or the welfare of an animal. And some of the other consequences of overvisitation. While no formal studies have been done, we have records that there have been road kills within Yala National Park, including leopards that have been killed in traffic accidents. A leopard being killed inside a national park as a result of a traffic accident. National parks have been declared not for us, but for wildlife and for their welfare. Harassment of wildlife at sightings, like I just showed you. Feeding wildlife and changing their behavior. Gemunu is a classic example. What Gemunu does, the Tusker Gemunu does, is not his fault. It is humans who taught him who started feeding him. And now he has become a problem because of us. So the animal is not at stake, not to be blamed. It is we who are to be blamed. In fact, when I was DG Wildlife, for the short time that I was there, the minister in charge of wildlife wanted me to capture Gemunu and take him to Horopatana. I flatly refused, saying that this tusker never leaves the park. If he never leaves the park, as Director General of Wildlife Conservation, there is no ethical way I can capture this animal and take him and put him in a holding ground. The reason that they wanted the animal captured is because it's bothering tourists and tourist vehicles. I, of course, believe when politicians tell me something stupid, I give a stupid answer as well. So I told him that the best way, this is a learned behavior. After a while, the elephant will unlearn this behavior. So we close the Yala National Park for 2 years. The elephant will unlearn the behavior because he doesn't see vehicles. He will forget that vehicles come in with food and he will be all right, which is a stupid thing to say because you can't close the park. But when I'm given a stupid directive, this is the type of answers we have to give. And it is because of my refusal that Gemunu is still in Yala National Park. then the government also is to blame. The government's overemphasis on tourism revenue result in the focus of being tourism and not conservation. Because the focus is tourism, the department tends to neglect protection and management because the resources are geared towards supporting tourism. We also have anecdotal evidence that there is a decline in wildlife populations. I've been going to Yala National Park since I was 5 years old. I'm 64 now, so for 59 consecutive years I've been going to Yala. And while I don't have formal data, the amount of wildlife I see in Yala is very much less than I used to see when I was a teenager. And I know all of you who is here, who have been going to the parks for many years, will agree with me. So our populations are going down. We have serious habitat issues, and it has adverse impacts on elephants in Yala. But we have to also realize, while I am promoting tourism, please realize that I am not promoting wildlife tourism at the expense of conservation. National parks were declared so that they are sanctuaries for wildlife. So we have to ensure that that priority objective is met first. But what we are doing to Yala now, I don't know whether a natural ecosystem can sustain this type of abuse and still meet its objectives of protection of wildlife and conservation of wildlife. So it must be kept in mind while we promote tourism that the purpose of establishing national parks is for the conservation and protection of wildlife, and the main mandate of the Department of Wildlife Conservation is conservation. My first staff meeting as DG Wildlife, I told them, api wanajeevi sancharaka departmentuwa nemei, wanajeevi sanrakshana departmentuwa. Because the promotion of wildlife tourism should be a secondary objective and should not be achieved at the expense of conservation. And this can be very easily done. The countries that I was showing you at the beginning of my presentation, they are doing this. They are conserving their wildlife and having large-scale wildlife tourism as well. So we also should be going on those lines. The charismatic wildlife in Yala prior to the leopard mania were elephants. In the 1970s, 80s, 90s, we used to go to Yala largely to see elephants more than leopards. But this is not a tourism issue. Since I'm talking about saving Yala, sometimes there are decisions that are made that have long-term conservation consequences. A one-dimensional political decision to erect an electric fence at the boundary of Yala National Park, the red line is the electric fence, was made in the year 2000. Dr. Prithviraj Fernando and I went and met the DG at the time and explained to him that on the other side of the boundary of Yala National Park, where the red electric fence line is Forest Department protected forests. And beyond that, you get the Nimalava Sanctuary. So if it is protected forest, there is no reason why elephants should be kept out of it. So we suggested that the electric fence should be located on the boundary of Nimalava, which is the boundary between the village and forest, not in the middle of the forest, on the boundary of Yala National Park. And in fairness, the Director General at that time agreed to do so, because we told him that elephants tend to go out in the dry season into the Chena areas, which is in the Forest Department land, to eat the Chena aftergrowth. There are no farmers there at that time. Chena cultivation is rain-fed. They cultivate from November to March, and the lands lie fallow after that. So by elephants going there at that time, it is not having any impact on humans and their livelihood, and elephants are having access to other resources during the dry season. Unfortunately, with the move of that DG, there was political pressure put on the Wildlife Department to erect the fence on the administrative boundary of Yala. Why was political pressure put? Political pressure was put so that the local community can go illegally into the Forest Department land and do Chena cultivation. So basically, we wanted the fence put on the boundary of Yala so that an illegal activity can take place, because votes are involved with communities. So the department had no alternative but to put the fence in the red line that I have shown here, and an elephant drive was done to drive the elephants into the park. We had radio collared some elephants in the area. So we had the elephants' home range. The yellow line is the electric fence, and this is the home range of the elephants. So the home range of this particular herd, this is a male, plus there were some herds that were collared, is inside and outside Yala National Park, outside being Forest Department land. With the erection of the fence, they lost access to the Forest Department area during the dry season. And this is a collared elephant. He looks pretty good in this photograph. And this is what happened to him after a few months during the dry season, because he couldn't go out and there wasn't enough food to support the elephant population in Yala. And he died in September 2006. This is a photograph of some herds that come into the Chena areas during the dry season. There is nobody there at that time to eat the Chena aftergrowth. And here, look at the elephant's body condition. Their ribs are not showing. Their spine and pelvic bones are not showing. Then with the fence, this is where the elephants are. And you can see their ribs showing. And because they are now deprived of adequate fodder. Another collared elephant, Bisomanike, from a herd. This is what she looked like when she could go out into the Chena areas. And this is what she looked like after the fence. Fortunately, she is still alive and keeping well. But with us blocking access to resources to elephants, the elephants start getting malnourished and elephants start dying. And there were elephants dying during that time. And these red dots are places where we found elephant carcasses. And please note, we are not, at that time, I was not in the department. We are not able to walk around inside the park. So these are on the roads and along the fence. The reason the elephants were dying, because this is a photograph taken on the same day. The top one is Yala Block 1 in the dry season. The bottom photograph is the surrounding Forest Department land during the dry season. Obviously, there is more fodder. During that period, most of the elephants used to be outside. And with farmers coming back for Chena, they go back into the forest. So it was a win-win situation. It was coexistence. There were no clashes between the herds and the farmers at that time. But we still had to erect a fence in the wrong location. And the Center for Conservation and Research has been doing a study since then on elephant calves, because we noticed that the elephant population in Yala was declining, but it could be that they have migrated somewhere. That's why CCR decided to study the elephant calves, because calves don't move without their mother. So they don't migrate anywhere if the mother is around. And the data we have up to date shows 54% of the calves below 2 years of age are still dying in Yala Block 1. We from the elephant research community feel that it is malnutrition, because the mother doesn't have enough nutrition to produce the milk necessary to support the calves, and that's why the calves are dying. But there has been a different opinion from some of the vets in the wildlife department who says the calves die. In their postmortems, they have noted that they have died of liver flukes, which is a parasite that is in water. But an elephant gets liver flukes only when his immunity is low. And his immunity is low when he is malnourished. So we come back to malnourishment. So elephants in Yala even today are malnourished. That is why today when you go to Yala, you don't see as many elephants as you saw 20, 30 years ago. It's not only that. There are other conservation consequences for tourism. The previous one I was saying, it was a conservation consequence of poor decision making or political involvements in decision making. But there are also other conservation consequences of indiscipline, visitation, and harassment of wildlife. The Udawalawe National Park, Dr. Shermin De Silva and her team did a study on elephant feeding patterns. The paper has not yet been published, but some of her team told me that they have noticed when elephants feed less when surrounded by vehicles because they are in protection mode and they are stressed out. Already because of the habitat change in Udawalawe, it is detrimental to elephants. And now because we are surrounding them, we are creating more stress problems for them and making them even weaker. I'm not saying we should stop visitation. All I'm saying is try to give some space to the elephants. Don't go too close to try to get your best photograph or to see the elephants up close. Give them some space so that they are not stressed out while you're observing them. So visitors need to be mindful of how our behavior impacts on wildlife. Then I was reading a study done in Thailand in a national park, and it was published in a peer-reviewed journal, the Mammalian Biology, in 2016. Overall, the study suggests that human presence can alter leopard movement patterns and behavior. The consequences of overvisitation include changes in behavior and may include adverse impacts on health, reproduction, and survival. While one study is not conclusive, I think this gives us a lot of food for thought. We are all going with this leopard mania to Yala, surrounding leopards, right? Viewing of leopards has become easy in Yala because of the leopard researchers who were doing research from the early 1990s in Yala. Researchers don't disturb animals. Researchers don't harass animals. Researchers try to study the natural behavior. And some of the researchers who did this work told me that because when the first time they used to see the leopards, they don't even take their camera out thinking they'll scare the animal. They wanted to get the animal used to vehicles. It's only then they can do their research. That's how the leopards got habituated. But today, because when the leopards get habituated, they bring their cubs out. When the cubs grow up, they are also not scared of vehicles, they are outside. Today, and I see Rukshan here, I remember Rukshan telling me some time ago that the cubs of leopards in Yala today are getting scared of vehicles. And if the cubs are getting scared of vehicles and running back into the jungle, when they grow up, they are not going to bring their cubs out. Neither are they going to come out. So if we continue what we are doing, it won't be the leopard paradise that we think it is, because leopard sightings will become more difficult in the longer term. So we have to realize these studies, we have to realize what the researchers are saying, we have to take that into management decisions and try to address these before it is too late. Is this trend reversible? It certainly is. So how do we reverse it? Most people say put limits on the number of vehicles entering Yala Block 1. It is easier said than done, because there are over 700 jeep drivers in the Yala National Park and its environs. And there are over 1,000 hotel rooms and guest house rooms in the Yala area. Now, if you put a limit on it, you suddenly get a lot of political pressure that the jeep drivers' livelihoods are being affected. And the hotel industry will put pressure that they have invested in the hotels. So at times, as conservationists, should we care about it? As a conservationist, maybe we shouldn't care about it. We should be worried only about the conservation of the wildlife. But since I was for a short time in the department, there I was also a wildlife manager. Then you suddenly realize that you have problems when you try to put limits. Because in 2017, 2018, I can't remember exactly which year it was, two ministers, subject minister and another minister, wanted to allow jeep drivers to go into the park when the park was closed. During the dry season, the park is closed for a month and a half. They wanted to allow jeep drivers to go in. They lobbied the political leadership. and the current president was prime minister at that time, and put a limit, got him to agree to, prime minister agreed to a limit of 150 vehicles into Yala. Then there was tremendous political pressure. The next week it went to 200. The week after that, 250, 300, 350, 400. And everybody felt happy saying that we'll have a limit of 500, which means you have no limit. Okay. So when you put in a rule, you bring in a rule that you can't enforce, and the jeep drivers can lobby politicians and get the numbers, the limits changed. What is the message that goes to the Department of Wildlife who is trying to manage this park? The jeep drivers feel they are more powerful than the department. So it becomes very difficult for the department actually to regulate the park. So I wouldn't really say that we should put limits on vehicles immediately. We will get to that over a 5-year period. There are other measures that we can take, right? The biggest problem in Yala is discipline, more than the number of vehicles. I have been at sightings where there are 5 vehicles and there is total chaos. So are we to say 5 vehicles is too much in the park? We have chaos because there is complete indiscipline at sightings. So the first thing we need to do is to discipline the jeep drivers. Not only the safari jeep drivers, the private jeep drivers, and the visitors in the vehicles. Because if you remember the last clip, it was not the jeep driver who was creating a problem, it was the guests in the vehicle who was asking the jeep driver to reverse to irritate that animal, right? So when you have livelihood issues at stake and the hotel industry against you, it becomes difficult to do things. So you have to do that on a phased out scale. So the action plan that we have prepared goes over a 5-year period for limits to be brought in. But I would like to appeal to the Wildlife Conservation Department, impose limits on all non-overcrowded parks now. Don't let it become Yala. Right now, in the area, except for Yala, Udawalawe, Min area, Kaudulla, Horton Plains, Vilpattu is on the borderline. None of the other parks are overcrowded. Impose limits on the non-overcrowded parks now. If the maximum number of vehicles that go to Vasgamo, if I remember correctly, in 2018 was about 55 vehicles a day. If you make it about 60 or 65, you don't put any jeep driver out of employment. You will then discourage unnecessary hotel rooms and accommodation being constructed. So the easiest way to do is to do limits on the non-overcrowded parks first, and then start addressing the overcrowded problems next. Then we have to move from looking at the quantity of visitors or the number of visitors that come into parks to the quality of visitation. We have to focus on quality over quantity. Most tourists say, if you look at some of their comments in TripAdvisor and other social media, most of them say they don't learn anything during a park visit, and they want proper nature interpretation, which means they are coming to learn something. Majority of the tourists are coming to learn something, but we are not giving them that. We are just showing them animals. A study that was done in 2018 by a graduate student, a German graduate student, I know about this study because I was her external supervisor when she was doing work in 2018. She studied tourist views in Min area, Kaudulla, Udawalawe, Pinnavela, and a private facility that had about 5 to 6 elephants, captive elephants. And at that time, the Moragahakan, the problem was not there. So Min area, Kaudulla had 350 to 400 elephants during the months of August, September, October. Pinnavela has close to 100 elephants. And this other setup has just 5 to 6 elephants. And the survey showed that the best experience was in that facility that had 5 to 6 elephants, simply because they said that they learned something. Because that facility had trained their naturalists to be able to explain elephant behavior and habits to the visitors. So that is what they all said was ranked number 1. So it is not the numbers that matter, it's the quality of the visitation that matters. Now in Yala National Park, we have all the ingredients for high quality nature interpretation. Yala has the best studied elephant population in Sri Lanka. All elephants in Yala have been identified by the Center of Conservation and Research. I have also been supporting them. And the demography and the family trees of all the elephants are available. So if you go with tourists, local or foreign, when you see an animal, if you can explain this is the mother, this is the daughter, this is the granddaughter, and which herd they belong to, and their behavior, it's a much more rich and wholesome experience than just going and seeing the number of elephants. Right? And just to clarify for people what we mean by nature interpretation, if by chance you see, for example, you see two males coming together, you should be able to tell your guests, if two males come together, if they're friends, like we shake hands, they will put their trunks to mouth. That means these two elephants are friends. And they get along well, they don't run into any conflict. Right? Similarly, I'm just showing two clips because I have hundreds of clips, but this lecture is not on elephant behavior. So I'm just trying to stress the point. Here there's a dominant male coming, the other male is submissive, he doesn't want conflict, see he turns his back and gives his back to the male, which means he is accepting the fact that the bigger male is more dominant than he is. So when he does that, there is no conflict between the two of them. Now, rather than seeing these two clips, what is better, seeing the two clips without knowing what is going on, or listening to an explanation as to what is going on? That gives a much more interesting experience. And this is the type of thing we should be going for, to try to build nature tourism capacity, interpretation capacity in our parks, so that the visitor experience is much better. If the quality of experience is much better, you can charge much more money. So you don't have to then go for the number of visitors. You can earn the same revenue or more with a lower number of visitors. Leopards in Yala also the same thing. From the early 1990s, several researchers have been studying leopards. Leopards have been identified, their behavior have been noted, home rangers have been identified, their family trees have been identified, right? It started with people like Rukshan and Dr. Samarasinghe, Ravi Samarasinghe, Jehan Kumara, people like that. Then other researchers like Anjali and Andrew got involved, and now a group called the Leopard Diaries with Dushanta Silva and his colleagues are doing research. So there's a lot of information. So it's very easy for us to give very good nature interpretation in Yala on leopards and elephants at least. Similarly, we can get other general information on other wildlife, so you can give a very wholesome experience to visitors. So we should have a clear vision if we are to save Yala from total destruction. Number one is improve discipline of drivers and visitors. Then improve the quality of the visitor experience. And most importantly, maintain our natural assets. If we do that, we should have a plan of converting Yala into a high quality wildlife tourism destination. Make wildlife tourism a driver and a major contributor to the economy, and make Sri Lanka internationally known as a land in harmony with nature. My friend Mr. Srilal Mittapala shared this information with me. Even with the worst possible tourism taking place in Yala, the national economy is earning 5.2 billion rupees a year, or $31 million a year from Yala now. The national economy is earning. That is with the type of visitation we are having now. Can you imagine if we are having high quality visitation and we can attract high quality clients? You could double, triple, or quadruple this number without increasing the number of visitors. But to do that, we have to start addressing a lot of issues in Yala. The issues to be addressed I have identified here. Some things I have mentioned before. Indiscipline of safari jeep drivers and passengers at sightings. High speed and reckless driving when trying to reach sightings. Vehicular congestion and disturbance to wildlife at sightings. Over-marketing Yala as a leopard sighting destination. I think even us from the wildlife department has to take the blame for it. The big sign outside the ticket counter in Yala is welcome to leopard paradise. So we are also promoting that it's a leopard destination. We should not be doing that. Right? Then lack of adequate facilities and staff, such as patrol vehicles for DWC to regulate tourism, and poor nature interpretation services offered by DWC and the jeep drivers. And the most important thing I have put in capital, continued political interference resulting in the lack of independence for DWC to regulate tourism within Yala. If the DWC suspends a jeep driver for misbehavior, if the jeep driver is connected to politicians, they run to a politician. The politician calls the park warden and puts pressure on the park warden to remove the suspension. This happened even during the time that I was there, because we brought in very strict rules. And in the short 2.5 months I was there, we suspended 70 jeep drivers for misbehavior. And I got telephone calls. I got 2 calls from 2 different ministers about 2 different jeep drivers, just as we started this program. But we had a good end to that, because I got the details of the jeep drivers from the ministers. Then I called the park warden and said, call these 2 jeep drivers and say that you all have gone and complained to the minister or the various ministers, and the ministers wanted your suspension removed. The DG has decided your 1 week suspension is now 1 month. You get 1 more, if the DG gets 1 more phone call, it will be 3 months. After that, 6 months. No more phone calls after that. Because they are even scared to go and tell a politician after that. Right? So this type of action needs to be taken to stop politicians from interfering in the system. So because of the problems in Yala in 2017, the current president, who was Prime Minister, appointed a committee in 2016 to come up with an action plan to improve the overall visitor experience in Yala. It was a multi-stakeholder committee. It had the wildlife department was on it, the tourism operators, the hoteliers, the private sector, the researchers, and I was appointed as chair of the committee. So we prepared a practically implementable action plan that was proposed. Unfortunately, in 2017, action plan was given. Nothing happened. Like many things that we do in this country, we prepare plans and give it to the higher authorities. Higher authorities sit on it. So nothing happened. Then recently, this issue came up again after that fiasco in Yala, where there were 35 vehicles that played hell in the park. And when the president spoke to me about what to do, I was telling him there is an action plan that we prepared under your direction in 2017. I think you should implement it now. So I was asked to revise the timeline and give it. So on the 29th of November, at a meeting, he instructed the wildlife department to start implementing this plan. And in that plan, I'm not going to go through every single one, but I'm going to talk about a few things so that you realize what we're trying to do. And it is not difficult things. There are 31 short-term actions to be implemented within a period of 1 year. Of that, the first action, and I have it in red here, the DWC officials to be empowered to enforce regulations without political backlash or interference, and the responsibilities with the president's office, because politicians are under him. It is the politicians who interfere, so he is the only one who can stop that. So if he is serious about trying to stop this, he has to start there, by stopping politicians from interfering with the actions that are taken by the wildlife department. Then that the wildlife department then has to play a role. At least 2 DWC vehicles should patrol the park between 6 a.m. and 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. daily. This is the times that there are visitors. Unless there is patrolling, however well we train people, however well we expect them to follow rules, people in Sri Lanka don't follow rules. So they have to be penalized. So patrolling has to be done. So that is a must. And strict enforcement of the rules and progressively increasing penalties. In 2016, when I was there also, what I spoke to the Jeep societies, I told them, first violation 1 week suspension, second violation 2 weeks, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months. All 70 suspensions we made was first violation. Nobody made a second violation. Because when you're suspended for a week, and even if you go to politicians, you can't get it removed, people start behaving themselves. And in fact, when I resigned, I thought I might be clobbered by the jeep drivers because I have a house in Yodakandia and all of them know where I stay. So I was a bit worried to go there. But the day after I resigned, there was a demonstration in Tissamaharama of jeep drivers asking the government to bring me back. When I went back to Tissa and spoke to them, they were saying they are fine with strict rules as long as it is enforced equally to everybody. And that's what you are doing, so we are okay with the rules. So that means the jeep drivers are easier to deal with than politicians. Right? So you have to have progressively increasing penalties. Then there are a lot of people who say the best way to stop speed bumps is to have GPS trackers in each vehicle. So if you have 400 vehicles in the park, that you will have to have a GPS tracking device in each vehicle. Who is going to monitor it? You will need a battalion of about 20 or 30 wildlife department officials standing by their computers to monitor who is violating. And that's impractical. And giving sophisticated equipment to any government agency is useless because they won't maintain it. We have experience not only with wildlife, with forest department, with many other departments. They don't maintain equipment. So there's no point doing that. Put speed bumps every 100 meters. The speed limit in the park is 25 kilometers an hour. If there's a speed bump every 100 meters, you have no choice but to go at 25 kilometers an hour. It's cheap and it is enforceable. That is what we need to do. But we must also have a problem now. The Kirinda Palatupana road, which was carpeted, the department insisted that there be speed bumps. So there were speed bumps. There still are speed bumps. Then one minister came to Yala, and because the bump was too much, because they had to go really slow over it, he got the side sloped. So now you can go quite fast over it. So you have to stop this type of nonsense if you are going to protect this resource. It doesn't belong to ministers. It doesn't belong to politicians. It doesn't belong to the wildlife department either. It belongs to all of us as the public and for future generations of this country. So we have to save it for every one of them. Then introduce a uniflow system wherever feasible. Training and accreditation of safari jeep drivers and DWC guides is a must. Under the funding and support of the Federation of Environmental Organizations in 2018-19, we trained 1,150 jeep drivers in Minneria, Kaudulla. And many of the drivers told us, we didn't know that we were not supposed to do this. Nobody told us. And since I do most of my elephant research in Minneria and Kaudulla, I noticed after the training a significant improvement in the jeep driver behavior. Right? So training and accreditation of safari jeep drivers has to be a must in Yala as well. I have already started talking to some of the hoteliers, at least asking them to train and certify the jeep drivers that they use. So you might address about 50% of the jeep drivers that way. That leaves only another 50% for the wildlife department to address. Then have standard operating procedures in relation to the behavior within national parks and at wildlife sightings. All commercial safari vehicles should be registered. Ones that are not already registered, there should be a date. They should register by that date and no new vehicle should be permitted. That is one way of capping the number without putting anybody out of employment. And the jeep drivers are agreeable to this. Whole action plan was discussed with the 3 jeep societies. They are okay with it. All commercial safari vehicles and drivers will be issued with a license to operate commercial safari vehicles in Yala by DWC. So it is only a licensed, trained, licensed, certified driver that should be able to go into a park. And the DWC should have a website where the names and vehicle numbers of offending commercial safari drivers are listed so that tourism operators and hotels can blacklist them and not provide business while rewarding good drivers. That's the best incentive to get drivers to behave themselves. Unfortunately, I know some of the hotels around Yala are hiring the worst drivers because they will guarantee you leopard sightings. So if the hotel industry is also trying to destroy, they have invested so much money in their hotels and they're hell-bent on destroying the resources in Yala on the short term. What are they going to do with their hotels after that? If there are no animals in Yala, nobody is going to come to Yala. So the hotel industry also has to play a role. We all like to blame the Wildlife Conservation Department. I'm not saying that the department is without blame. They have to be blamed for not doing the right thing. But we are not absolved either. Safari jeep drivers are to blame for the mess in Yala. The hoteliers are to be blamed for the mess. The tour operators are to be blamed. And we as the visitors, all of us are to be blamed as well. So we all have to play a role in trying to solve this. And all visitors should get a 5-minute briefing of rules of the national park prior to entry into the park. This doesn't have to be at the ticket counter. The jeep driver can do it when he picks up passengers. Firstly, I was recently doing a training in one of the hotels for some of their jeep drivers. I asked the jeep drivers, how many of you, when you get your guests, how many of you ask them, what do you want to see? Nobody raised their hand. So then I told them, you are going and showing them what you want to see, not what they want to see, because you have not even asked them what they want to see. Because everybody doesn't have a leopard mania. Some want to see birds. So you must know what your client wants to see. So this 5-minute briefing of the do's and don'ts of the park, as well as talking to your client about what they want, will make it a better safari. But the department also has to undertake brief but regular visitor satisfaction surveys so that we know whether what the department is doing is right and what needs to be changed. To implement an e-ticketing system for park entrance tickets, I think they have already started this. We also suggested in the committee that there should be a price differentiation for early booking. Cheaper when you book early, because that way you can control numbers at a later date by shutting down the system after a certain number of tickets. Then introduce a surcharge on entry fees for during long holidays, right? So that over-visitation is discouraged. Also, some vehicles go with 1 or 2 people. I know sometimes we like to go to see what we want. Then you have to pay for it. Because then hotels and all might try to fill vehicles. I'm trying to reduce the number of vehicles without putting a limit. That's why we are suggesting these things. So if there is there's a higher fee for a low load factor vehicle, then people who are generally going into the park might be willing to get together. Then we had 8 medium-term actions to be implemented by the end of year 2. If they start in 2023, this section should be done by 2024. Investigate the possibility of zoning Yala Block 1 into 2 zones. But taking care to ensure that each zone has a good opportunity for wildlife sightings. In fact, in 2017, Rukshan, Mr. Ranjan Marasinghe from the Wildlife Department and I, we went and did a full day visit in Yala trying to figure out whether it can be zoned. And it can easily be zoned into 2 zones. One zone, the entrance will be from Katagamu, the other zone, the entrance will be from Palatupana. We came up with a problem that nobody would really imagine we would come up with. So if it can be zoned, why didn't the department zone it? Right? If by chance, if you zone it, means you have to have a limit on the number of vehicles going in. Let's say you have 500 vehicles and you say 250 for each zone. If the 251st vehicle comes to Palatupana and you tell them, sorry, this zone is closed, go to Katagamu zone. It will take him 1 hour, 15 minutes to go to Katagamu, which is not practical. So we figured, okay, let's have some tickets being sold in Palatupana and Katagamu. The other tickets have a ticket office in Tisamaharama. Because from Tisamaharama, you can direct its equidistance to Katagamu or Palatupana. Then we suddenly realized, when there are sometimes during peak visitation times, there are 300 to 400 vehicles parked to buy tickets. There is no place in Tisamaharama that you can have parked 300 to 400 vehicles till the tickets are bought. So those are logistic problems that need to be worked out. So sometimes when the intention to do something is there are logistical problems that we have to deal with. Right? Then prepare a plan to open the west side of Situlpawa Road for visitation. The west side of the Situlpawa Road is 1/3 of Yala National Park, Block 1. Now there is a road network that the department has constructed. We should try to open that out for visitation and send some guests in that direction. or limit it to very high-end tourism there. You have to pay through your nose to go there for a limited number of vehicles. We can look at options like that. Then the tourism industry should take action to reduce mass tourism in Yala by marketing other national parks or not marketing a national park at all when people are not interested. I have seen with my own eyes at leopard sightings, tourists are looking at their smartphone. So obviously the leopard is not of any interest to them. So why are we bringing them into a park? Because they are on the tourist route, park visit is part of the thing. So the tourism operators and the industry has to play a role in trying not to send people who are not interested in wildlife tourism into wildlife parks. Then to undertake a carrying capacity assessment of Yala Block 1, taking into consideration conservation issues, hotel room capacity, and DWC resources, so that we have a rough idea of what the capacity is, because that is what we should aim for to go in 5 to 6 years. And the DWC should work with the private sector and SLTDA to develop a differentiated products for Yala. Right now we have one product. You get into a vehicle and go and see animals. There's no other product, right? To see whether there can be some practical, interesting differentiated products. Then there were a couple of long-term actions. If differentiated products are feasible for Yala, and it is within the legislative framework of the Fauna and Flora Protection Ordinance, DWC to work with SLTDA to introduce such products. Based on the results of the carrying capacity assessment, introduce a phased program to gradually limit the number of vehicles entering Yala Block 1, but this should be done in conjunction with the improvement of wildlife sightings in blocks 3, 4, and 5. See, while 3, 4, and 5 is open, just telling people you have to go there, nobody would go because there are no good sightings. It is not that there is no good wildlife. There's plenty of good wildlife. They are not habituated to vehicles. So if they are not habituated to vehicles, when they hear the sound of the vehicle, they hide. So we have to make them a bit habituated so that you have sightings. Then only you can split some of the traffic that is going to block 1 into 3, 4, 5. But how do we try to habituate the animals there when you have no sightings? Nobody wants to go. Maybe we should, the blocks 3 and 4 have some excellent rock outcrops, caves with cave paintings. Maybe we should try to market those 2 blocks as a wilderness experience rather than a wildlife experience, so that people would start going for that. And then vehicles going into the park will habituate animals. After a few years, sightings will be good. Then we can redistribute the vehicles in block 1, right? And if we start reducing by 10 to 20% a year, after all this has been done, right? After about 3 years of doing all this background work, habituating animals to the other parks, in the other blocks, and then start reducing the number of vehicles, then we might be in a position to redistribute the vehicles within the carrying capacity. Now, if you look at all these actions, is there anything that is very complicated to do? I don't think there is anything complicated. We had discussions in 2017 with the Jeep societies. They didn't think there was an issue. The Wildlife Department doesn't think there's an issue. They were part of the committee that came up with the plan. Mr. Marasinghe, who was a member of the committee, is here today. The wildlife has no issue with implementing this. So we should start implementing it now. And gradually, in about 5 to 6 years' time, maybe we might be in a position where Yala could be returned back to its old glory. These results, by doing this, we can expect certain results. Indiscipline and bad behavior of safari vehicle operators can be curbed as long as there is good enforcement and penalties. Without enforcement and penalties, all the training in the world is not going to get us anywhere. Ensure adherence to speed limits through speed barriers, speed bumps, and introduce a gradual approach to limiting the number of vehicles in block 1. This phased approach to improving the situation in Yala is proposed so that we are not affecting the livelihoods of jeep drivers or affecting the investments already made in hotels. But there should be a moratorium of hotel construction right now Recently, Sunela and I had a discussion with His Excellency the President on this issue, and he was all game for putting a moratorium on building hotel rooms in that area, because that needs to be done immediately. Because if not, this problem is going to get worse, not better. Right? So if we start doing things like that, we can start improving the situation in Yala. And I don't think these are very difficult things to do. We need to have commitment. And all of us are responsible for this, so all of us should play a role in trying to solve the problem as well. When we go with a driver, we are paying the driver. We can tell the driver how to behave. Right? If every one of us starts doing that, and we tell our friends also to start doing that, automatically drivers will start behaving themselves, because they are going to lose business if not. So we have a large role to play. The wildlife photographers have a very, very significant role to play. I'm sorry, I'm putting all photographers into one basket, but there is a lot of misbehavior that I have noticed among wildlife photographers. There are some here who are very good wildlife photographers. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the guys in that vehicle that was trying to irritate the animal to charge so that they can get better photographs. They certainly are not wildlife photographers if they're doing that. Right? So we need to be responsible. If you can't get your shots in the first visit, come again. Right? I have elephant behavior, like what I showed you. I have 2 lectures that I give on elephant behavior. Each is about an hour and 20-minute lectures. To get those, let's say, 2.5 hours of lectures, it took me 5 years of being in parks. Right? So you have to be having the patience to invest the time if you want good photography or to learn things. So if we start doing that, I think then we can stop the degradation of Yala and it will be back to its old glory. I would like to end with this saying, I think this is very apt for Yala. We can't influence human occupancy now in Yala, but in creating a better understanding of the extent of that influence and a new ethic for its governance, we might be able to save Yala from its current position. I would like to end by thanking the Environmental Foundation Limited, the Center for Conservation and Research, and Mr. Srilal Mittapala, because some of the information and data for sections of this presentation were provided by these organizations. Thank you very much. Up to my 1 hour.
Okay, thank you, Sumit. So, question time. If you elongate your questions, we'll shut you up. So please keep your questions very short and to the point. You are not the resource speaker. You want a question, throw it this way. We have a... No. Okay, floor's open. I see Shankar's hand up there. And there's one hand up here. Okay, one there. So we'll start there.
Hi, Doctor.
My question is that...
Yes, Shankar.
Sorry. So just 2 questions. One, so we have a really good plan, right? The dialogue or whatever the Mobitel, whatever the call signals, I've seen as a photographer, I've stopped going to Yala. I've seen it very well. When you see a sighting, all the Jeep drivers communicate with each other saying that, come soon, there's a leopard. Yes. So they start speeding. Yes, that's where we need the speed bumps. Is there a way that we can sort of limit the calls and give, now for example, there are rangers inside, right? So if we can give them walkies or whatever for emergency sake where they can communicate. So that's the first question. Second question is, yes, ministers are being ministers. They always pin down the department and they are somewhat tied their hands, right? How can we as a group of photographers support the department to control these fellows?
Okay. On the first issue of shutting the towers down, at least during the time periods, I think the department has been talking to the telecom companies The companies are worried that fundamental rights cases will be filed by other people who are not in the park, saying that the towers are being turned off. So there is a bit of an issue there. But if you have a uniflow system and speed bumps, even if you get a message, it will be too late by the time you go there. That will slow down this rush. Because if it's one-way systems, it's not easy to get back to a place where you get a sighting. But maybe, I don't know whether Mr. Marasinha would like to say something about the towers. Can you give a mic to him? Because I know that he has been trying very hard to see whether this can be stopped. Then I'll get to your second question after Mr. Marasinha's response.
Yes. Yes, we tried with the Telecom Regulatory Commission to summon all the mobile operators, and we tried because we have to establish scientific, evidence to do something like that. So we wanted to have a, pilot test. So with lot of effort, we got the, all the companies to stop the towers transmission during different times, randomly selected different times, and we did a research, right? So the final outcome of the research was that during the cell signals are on, visitor satisfaction is high, and when the signals are off, satisfaction is low. So that is the outcome of that research. With that research, we couldn't push the Telecom Regulatory Commission to stop the entire that operation inside Yala National Park. And there are there are a lot of pressures against stopping that one, because that is the fundamental reason, the basic reason that they have ordered. If they stop broadcast, the transmission of their transmission towers, then there will be fundamental right case filed against those companies, because all the mobile operators are having a right for them to get the service from those companies. So that is one thing. I don't believe on that, but because of that only, we decided to have this one-way uniflow system and the road blocks. Now, most of the proposal that I engaged in developing this, the Reawakening Yala and that all these things, not the new one. The new one is an extension of the previous ones. So that's why we used this uniflow system and road bumps instead of trying to block the towers. So it is politically and business-wise, it's very difficult decision to make. And even today, I am trying to stop the tower transmission if it is possible, but it's very hard.
So I think we shouldn't worry about the towers. You put speed bumps and one-way systems, it is difficult to get to the location. So that automatically stops it, right? Your second question of what we can do to the politicians. See, I feel that we from the wildlife conservation community also have some blame, because if anything goes wrong, we know that it's a politician who has told the department to do it, but all media articles blame the department, right? Very few blame the politicians directly. So I think we also should have the courage to sit and blame the politicians directly when they do these things. And we should unite and support the department, because as an officer in the department, it's a very difficult thing to go against what a minister wants, right? So you have to, we from outside can support them by raising issues in the media about these ministerial decisions, right? For example, a certain minister wanted this trenches dug for HEC mitigation, Agal, the trenches, right? And the trenches that were dug largely were areas where there is gravel. So when the media asked me, I said, well, I learned something from this minister. I never knew elephants go out from areas where there is gravel underground, right? Because that's why you're digging the trenches. So that alone shows that the trenches were not for elephants. It was to excavate gravel for sale. And the minister had his catchers who were excavating. So we have to start talking about those in the media. So all of us have a role to play. The society has a role to play, right? Yeah.
My question is, there are a lot of the young people that are working in the parks and everything, and most of these guys, when we asked them if they were permanent or they were temporary, almost all, some of them were temporary for years. So if you're going to improve the situation in the parks, what you have to do then is that the people that are working there, the trackers and the people that are working in the bungalows, the good ones should be given permanency. So that's security right there. And is there a policy that they have for how many years a person works in the park before they become permanent?
No, there is no policy. That's one of the problems. This is where the department started some years ago hiring volunteer people as volunteer trackers, right? So that, because it's very difficult to make permanency in the government. It's very difficult. So because of that, they started that route. So I agree with you that that is not good. They should have permanency. But I also have a slightly different opinion on that. As soon as you become permanent, and this is what I have noticed of volunteer trackers who have become permanent. As soon as they become permanent, they become completely complacent. When they were volunteer trackers, they were much more interested because their survival is on tips. They read, they study, and they try to explain things to guests. As soon as you become permanent, that's it. So that problem is also there. And again, I'm very sympathetic about what happened. See, I'm not in a position to recruit or not because I'm not in government anymore. But I'm telling you my opinion on that. And right now with the IMF conditions, I'm pretty sure there is a condition saying that we should not be increasing the public service. So it will be very difficult to recruit them. In fact, I keep telling them to ask for a higher daily rate rather than asking for permanency because that might be more practical. I fully sympathize with the volunteer trackers that they should have some stability. But also there is a negative. If you are permanent, that's why everybody wants to work in the public service in the country, in any government job, because once you get it, you're set. You don't need to work much anymore. Sorry? I agree. Firing in government is a bit difficult. So that's why we keep saying system change. The system has to change. The way the system is going now, you can't do anything. Because there is no accountability in government. There is no accountability among politicians. There is no accountability among bureaucrats as well.
Hi, Sumith, Ranil here.
Yes.
This is more than, it's not really a question, it's more a suggestion, but in the limiting through e-ticketing, I think you brought that up in your presentation. I think one of the things is with e-ticketing, probably people can buy tickets in advance, as you were saying, reserved well in advance. So if there was a limitation to the number of tickets that one buys, and then that's one way of also controlling the numbers, and some kind of absolute number, whether it was 250 and 250 for each zone. So once you've bought 250 tickets, that's it. You can't buy any more tickets. So you can buy your ticket even in Timbuktu or Colombo or wherever it is you're buying your ticket. And so, I mean, if you go to a theater, for instance, or a cinema, if that capacity is only 300 seats, I mean, you cannot sell 400 seats to that ticket, to that play or theater or movie. So the e-ticketing solution, because I think nowadays for one to just rock up to a national park and expect to go in, I think is ambitious to say the least.
I agree. In fact, the long-term goal of the department is to do that. But you have to do it in such a way at this point without putting people out of employment immediately. You have to try to develop the other parks in the area and try to redistribute the numbers. That's why I'm saying put limits on the parks that are not overcrowded now so that it doesn't become a mess. Because once it becomes a mess, it's much more complicated to solve. But that, I think the department is planning on doing that, right? Put limits. Yeah. Yes. But one thing is we have to always make sure never ever, that's my policy, never ever bring in a decision that you will be forced to overturn. Because if you overturn one decision, you are sending a message that anything can be overturned after that. So you have to be, when you know the politics of it, you have to be a bit careful. Livelihood issues are the bigger thing. So at this point, you have to say, but if you have a long-term plan where you're going to redistribute the vehicles, then you can bring in limits once you redistribute. There won't be any problem then. Somebody else? Yes.
Dr. Ubaya, I think commending the great services that the DWC does based on the constraints they have. Is there any measure that we could take to bring back the respect for them? Because I see it's a uniform staff. So I think in some of the parks, we cannot identify who the laborer or the DWC official because they don't wear any uniform. So if we can have the uniform staff placed, so then there will be respect from the visitors, respect from the rest of the community and the jeep drivers. So that could bring in a different, discipline into the system.
I agree.
What's your take on that?
I totally agree with you. The constraints as to why that cannot be done, I think I might have to ask Ranjan again, because it's since I left the department in 2016, right? Ranjan, do you mind answering that question?
Sorry, I'm going to interject. I'm not letting any more questions from that side. One last question and then we are shifting to this side. Sorry. Okay.
See, I agree with you, the fact that if they are uniformed, it gives this thing, but there are, I'll tell you my experience without putting him on the spot, because I'm the one who is supposed to be speaking today. During my time, when I was trying to ask them to wear uniforms, the unions, the Game Guards Union, for example, and other unions were fussing that they were not very happy with the buckle that has been bought in the uniform or the boots that has been bought. Then I suggested, why don't you put a representative from the union in the tender board? If their representative agrees in what is being selected, then it's bad luck, right? You have to take some measures like that to try to do it. But that's something that's absolutely necessary. I totally agree with you, because sometimes the visitors don't know who is department and who is not. Yes.
Hi, Sumit.
Hi.
Bit of a big picture question for you. Looking at some of the numbers you put up, Yala Block 1 is generating roughly, including the hotels, roughly $31 million a year. Right? Now, even if you double that, triple that, that's still a very paltry amount for what is one of the iconic natural resources and sites in this country. So, some significant paradigm shift is probably required to unlock what should be the true value of that ecosystem from a monetary standpoint. So my question to you is, and you alluded to this in one of your slides, which you said, within the FFPO, whether other activities, etc., can be introduced. So do you think that within the FFPO currently that it allows for the freedom and the flexibility to actually unlock that value? And if not, is there a tweaking that is required to the FFPO?
Well, the FFPO is a very restrictive piece of legislation. So in the current form of the FFPO, it is very difficult to do any of what you're saying, except for the fact that if you really have good nature interpretation, you can start increasing the price of that guests would pay for the visit. Because right now we just show animals. If you start interpreting properly, that can be done. But to bring in other new activities, there may be certain amendments in the FFPO that may be needed. So that is something that has to be looked at, right? The scary part about trying to amend the FFPO is what happens generally in government is if an act needs to be amended, a committee is appointed by the respective ministry. It can have external people as well as internal people. You make some amendments to the act. Then it is sent to the legal draftsman. After it is approved from there, it goes to AGs, and then finally it goes to Parliament. If Parliament makes certain changes, it doesn't come back to the department and nobody else has a say in what happens. So with the current parliamentarians, I would be very nervous to send an act like that, because whatever it is, whatever the faults of the wildlife department is, the wildlife department has been controlling encroachments into their protected areas much better than the forest department. right? Parliament might try to relax some of those things. So it's a double-edged sword sending the act for amendment. I would be a bit nervous at this point.
This is a question for WNPS. How can WNPS play a part in training the drivers as well as the trackers? Any thoughts on that?
Yes, in fact,
I can give many answers, but I'm going to let Jehan.
Yeah,
do that
Jehan and I were
because
talking about it a couple of days ago,
We've
right?
been doing quite a bit on those fronts, Jehan.
The Federation of Environmental Organizations in 2018, 18 and 19, and it was headed by Rohan at that time, and I was also a trustee of the FEO at that time. We did a program with approval with the Department of Wildlife in Mineria National Park and Wilpattu and Kaudula, yes.
Vaskama was done a couple of weeks ago.
Okay, so I think at the moment the department, what they're going through is they have financial constraints. So I think organizations like us, WNPS, FEO, we can always step in and see how we can work together to do this training. In Yala National Park, it's always a challenge because of the political influence. And as Sumith was stating earlier, one of the better ways of doing it is to approach the hotels that they have decided, like say for example, I'm just throwing a name and a number, Cinnamon Lake or Cinnamon Wild. We'll say we are only hiring these 40 Jeep drivers. So we should, through them, get those 40 Jeep drivers trained along with a Department of Wildlife representation there in the training. So yes, this is something that WNPS and other organizations can step in and help out. We have done in the past, and if the need is there, for sure it is there, but we can do that.
But all the training in the world is useless if the department doesn't have make a statement saying that only trained drivers can come in. Yeah. And then enforcement is also necessary. If you don't enforce, you can train people, they still will start misbehaving. So it's all combined. And unfortunately, many of these action plans in Sri Lanka, we cherry pick the easy ones to do. And that I always tell politicians when they talk to me, when they try to do that, it's like trying to bake a cake. You have a recipe, you put 30% of the ingredients, you're not going to come up with the cake. So most of our plans, we cherry pick what is easy to do and do those, but you don't want to do the difficult ones. A plan has to be implemented comprehensively. This plan will work if we implement it comprehensively.
Hi.
Okay, so we're taking that. One more question and that's it. Quick comment. Somebody asked earlier on uniforms and things. You should see the tracker uniforms that WNPS has done. We don't have enough money to give everyone, but the ones that we have given, everybody's wanting more and more. So
a quick question.
Yeah.
A quick question. I was taught 2 years ago at the Udawalawe, one of the reservoirs, a guide, a young chap, okay, and he had these torn pages of a bird ornithology booklet, and he showed me very far away a hoopoe and said, that's a hoopoe, that's a very shy bird, and that you can't see it very often in other areas, okay? So my question is this, that young chap, that young man had the audacity to go and learn about all these things, buy a book, and to kind of like refresh his capacity to be a good Jeep driver as well as a naturalist in his own way, okay? So my question is, have you all done a study to see what level of school attainment they have got, like primary school educated, the secondary school educated, tertiary educated, etc., and whether to kind of like, you know, handpick people who show great promise, and then to kind of have something like an NGO for conservation, which might be able to kind of like those handpicked people, give them a good training on mostly the charismatic species, and try and kind of like connect their education level, their English knowledge, their natural abilities, and to train a workforce which can be kind of beneficial, not just for Yala, but the whole tourism industry as a whole. Yeah.
Yes, that's a very good idea. Things like that need to be done. One of the problems we have is we realized that when we were doing the Jeep driver training in Minneria Kaudulla, there were some drivers who couldn't sign their name. They had to put thumbprints. Right? That was the level of education of some of the drivers. So we do a basic training course for all these drivers to certify them, which not only focuses on driving etiquette and behavior in a park, but also basic knowledge on animal behavior. And then the department, Mr. Manasinghe and I have been talking about this for a while now, that the department would like to then have higher level training, not mandatory for everybody because some people can't handle it, but the ones who are interested, so that right now we certify drivers as a certified safari driver. If you get the higher level training, you can be certified as a safari driver guide. Go to that level. Everybody won't be able to go to that level. It will be the ones who have the educational background and the knowledge to be able to do that. But try to have incentives like that, because then safari driver guides could get paid more than safari drivers only. So there are some options that we are playing around right now to try to figure out what to do. Yes.
One last question there.
Dr. Pilapitiya, Naveen Marapan here. Is it actually a question of overcrowding or over-concentration? Because if you look at the contiguous jungle areas of blocks 1, 2, 3, 4, the SNR and Kumana, separated by the river.
It's not overcrowding.
It is 343,000 acres of land. Block 2 is only 10% of that. And this crowding problem is only in about 10% of block 1.
Yes.
So my question is it not a redistribution issue? The second question is, if an animal wanted to avoid seeing a human being for the whole of his life, it is still possible. Because about 80% of the park, nobody goes. So the conservation things didn't address the issue of the dangers of lack of travel into the parks. Because when legitimate visitors don't go, poachers, treasure hunters, ganja cultivators roam those areas, and there's a bigger danger to conservation when nobody goes. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, what I was saying, that there are too many vehicles going into Yala Block 1, that's for sure. But the bigger problem is discipline rather than the crowds. And I go to Yala, and if I take a friend and go into Yala, I can go into areas of Yala that you will never see another vehicle. Right? So it has more space for sure. But the areas where you have the main road and the Butua, Urania area and all that, it's overcrowded. To redistribute the concentration to the other blocks is what we need to do, but you have to habituate a few animals in those blocks. If not, sightings won't be there and people won't want to go. If not, the blocks are open, nobody goes because there are no sightings. But if you do get a sighting there, it's an exclusive sighting. So you're right, that needs to be looked at properly, right? And eventually we have to go for redistribution of the vehicles. But you can't do that immediately because there'll be too much political pressure and we will not be able to sustain that. And once a decision is overruled by jeep driver pressure, the message you are sending to the jeep drivers is you are more powerful than the wildlife department. So that we have to stop, because then the park warden can't even discipline. Now, some of the park wardens that I have spoken to, I asked them, why aren't you all suspending drivers? You can do that. They say the problem is if we suspend a few drivers and they go to politicians and we get overruled, then you can never discipline that driver ever again because he thinks he's more powerful than the park warden. So it is better not to do that so that we don't get embarrassed. That's why the first action in the action plan is that protection has to be given to the Wildlife Conservation Department from political pressure, right? Now, when I was there, I was taking the pressure because I am on a World Bank pension. So I can afford to get thrown out of my job. I don't think the current DG can afford to get thrown out from his job. So it's very unfair to expect him to take a stand. You have to realize that's where if the president wants this to work, he has to tell his politicians not to interfere. or give a public statement saying the wildlife department should not listen to any politician, do your job properly. That also strengthens the department to do their job. So unless statements like that come out from the higher level of the political hierarchy, it's very difficult to do anything.
Hi, Sumit. So I do understand that the vehicles without trackers are the ones that do most of the wrong.
I don't agree. I have seen vehicles with trackers doing worse things than vehicles without trackers. Every time, Mr. Marasinghe will say, every time I talk to a closed wildlife group only, department group, I keep saying that the wildlife department officials do the biggest violations because they feel because we are wildlife, we can do what we want. That is wrong.
Yes, but that is true. But now last time we went to Yala, there were 10 vehicles right across the road. Now there can't be 10 vehicles across a road, right? And they were all blocking a leopard. So when the leopard moved, they drove on the green grass area, okay? None of those jeeps had trackers. And I did take photos and I did give it to the wildlife department and put complaints. Of course, I couldn't take photos of everybody. Okay, so at least if there is a tracker who's responsible to the wildlife department, and then you have the jeep driver who is, responsible for his own thing, there's a balance. Whereas if you don't have that balance, then the safari jeep driver can do what he wants regardless of the training.
But in some other countries in Africa, there is no tracker in each vehicle, but the department patrols. The conservation agency patrols the park during visitation. I have seen if they spot the department vehicle coming, behavior changes. So no, but problem is in Sri Lanka, you cannot recruit that many staff because during the month of December, from the 20th of December to the 31st of December, you have at least 700 to 800 vehicles inside Yala. Okay, so which means one tracker per vehicle means 700 to 800 people. There is 1,500 in the entire department, of which only 800 in the field. Right? Recruitment, the government won't allow them to recruit. When I was DG in 2016, there were 500 approved cadre vacancies. 500 approved cadre vacancies. The treasury is not releasing funds to pay them a salary, so you can't recruit them. And I think the situation is still the same, 7 or 8 years later.
Company to help with those voluntary...
One of the options that the department has been looking at, or we have suggested to the department, is get the local community, train them, they work on behalf of you.
Yeah.
Right? They work on behalf of the Wildlife Conservation Department to do monitoring. Unfortunately, jeep drivers also from the local community. Right? You have problems like that. Some voluntary trackers, during my period, some of the volunteer trackers were telling me that the problem is when we are very strict with the jeep drivers, when we have to go home, we have to go in one of those jeeps. Then I was talking to the warden, trying to see whether we can get a bus organized to bring from Tissa Maharama to bring people from Tissa and Kirinda to the park in the morning and take them back so that you don't have to depend on the jeep drivers. So we have to look at innovative ways of dealing with it. But having strict regulation is absolutely necessary. If you can get the local community to have people to work on behalf of the wildlife department in a vehicle, it's a good thing. So we have to look for options like that. Recruiting staff to the department is not going to be possible. That's not going to work out, however badly the department needs it.
Okay, so we're going to bring that interesting discussion to a close. Thank you again, Sumit, for accepting our invitation and being forthright as always.